And on with our content today, we'll be talking about an introduction to Utah trees and forests. Perhaps my title is not as accurate as it should have been, one of my colleagues pointed out, and I'd like to say now that we're going to focus today on Utah's native trees and forests. We're not going to talk about urban trees and forests, but I think that's an excellent topic for a future webcast. Utah is about 1/3 forested, or it's about 15 million acres of forest and woodland of our total land base. Much of that forest occurs in our uplands. 5 million acres of what we call upland forest, pines and quakies and that sort. In a lot of ways, I believe that these forests are some of our most important lands in Utah, because this is where most of our water is collected, and this is our great big filtering system for all that water. And I think most of us would agree that water is certainly our most important resource here in Utah. And so protecting our forests is important towards protecting our water resources, especially our upland forests. Here's a high elevation forests, Cache National Forest at about 9,000 feet, Douglas fir, spruce, and limber pine. In Utah, forests develop according to aspect and elevation. The water that's available tends to be the controlling factor. Some places, like further north, sunlight is a controlling factor, but here in Utah it's definitely water. High elevations and northern aspects definitely have the most water and therefore have the most forest. This again, a high elevation forest in the Cache National Forest, currently called the Uinta Wasatch Cache National Forest, and just plainly shows on this north aspect. Get my pointer. Here, there's lots of forest and coniferous forests, but there on the southern aspect, there's just quakies and more open grown. Another example of the same sort of thing, with this being the northern aspect here, and the southern aspect being on this side, this area called White Pine Knob and Magog Peak here on the cache. We can break our forest resources into three different sorts. One, the higher elevation forests, which tend to be dominated by the conifers and the aspens. Again, they tend to be on the northern and eastern aspects, because those are the cooler and wetter aspects. Mid-elevation forests tend to be in our foothills. We call them woodlands often. They're mostly made up of pinyon and juniper stands and oak and maple stands. This from the Raft Rivers, the pinyon in the foreground. This from the Wellsville Mountains, maple and aspen, and mid-elevation forests. Low-elevation forests in Utah mostly consist of those along the stream beds and the valley bottoms, which include cottonwoods, willows, box elders, and the like. Down on our valley bottoms, these were the only true native forests that grew. Another way to break forests into understandable types is by forest types. These are categories that help us in this understanding, and they're mostly identified by the dominant trees in each forest type. These are the different types of forests that we have in Utah. Those mid-elevation oak and maple woodlands, and the pinyon and juniper woodlands that we tend to call PJ together. Aspen forest types. There's a Douglas fir forest type. There's spruce fir forest type, and pines. Going with the first forest type at mid-elevations, the oak and maple woodlands. They tend to occupy our lower mountain slopes. They really offer a lot of fall color, more so the maple than the oak. Typically at elevations between 5,000 and 7,800 feet. And they're really important for birds and big game, and also for recreation. This background photo is the Mueller Park area out of Salt Lake, out of Bountiful. And this background photo of the oak is more down in the, actually it's in the same neighborhood near Bountiful. Gambel oak is our most common oak, and the Latin name is following the common name there, Quercus gambeli. I'll introduce the Latin names all along just as a means of making sure everybody can speak the same language. As you'll see throughout the presentation, there's often several names for our trees, several common names and historic names for the same tree, and it can be pretty confusing. So that's where the scientific or Latin names become more helpful. Our Gambel oak, there's other oaks, but it's mostly Gambel oak, especially in the northern part of the state. It tends to prefer the southern aspects. It's a very fire-adapted species. It grows back really quickly from root sprouts right after a fire. It's a very scrubby species. It tends to grow less than 30 feet tall. It's not. I occasionally have people from eastern United States call me and ask me about our oak and maple forests here, and I always have to explain to them that they tend to be more scrubby. They're not the oak and maple forests that they perhaps picture that they see in their backyard there. It grows north as far as Manaway at the south end of Sardine Canyon near Brigham City. To identify oak, it's that classic leaf shape, the lobed, multi-lobes near the leaf, or on each leaf, and that really stand out as an oak leaf. They turn orange or yellow in the fall. Sometimes some reds if the weather and everything is just perfect, but they tend to be more orange, yellow, or brown. Brown is probably the most common, and it tends to grow in clumps. Maple, our most common is Bigtooth or canyon maple. There are others, certainly, including the box elder, and there's also a Rocky Mountain maple, but most of what we see is the Bigtooth maple. It prefers northern aspects, and it's also, I guess scrubby is kind of a strong word for it. It has several stems, usually not real large diameter, but more of a smaller tree, and it tends to grow less than 50 feet tall. This from the Wellsville Mountains, where we have great maple color every fall. Identifying Bigtooth maple, it has that classic maple leaf shape, just like the flag of Canada. It can grow as high as 50 feet, and the stems tend to be less than 10 inches in diameter. And often one tree will have several stems. This is the classic maple leaf, just starting to turn in the fall. More of the same. On to our next forest type, Pinyon Juniper, commonly called PJ. It's Utah's certainly most common forest type, covering over 8 million acres across Utah. Tends to grow at lower elevations, 5,000 to 8,000 feet, and 60% of Utah's overall forest cover is made up of Pinyon Juniper, which makes it a pretty important one for us. It ranges from mixed stands in southern Utah to pure juniper stands, which are fairly common here in northern part of the state. Breaking it up, understanding each of the species, in the pinyon there tends to be just two different kinds, the Singleleaf and the Colorado. The Singleleaf, it grows up as far north as Raft River Mountains and actually into Idaho just a little bit, into the City of Rocks area where this background photo is from, and lots of beautiful large single-leaf pinyon there. And it grows also in central and southern Utah. In southern Utah, Colorado pinyon is much more common. and it grows throughout the southern part of the state and up into the central and across into eastern Utah. Identifying single-leaf pinyon it's the only pine that the needles are born singly on the tree. Almost all pines, the needles, it's how we tell what a pine is from a fir or from a spruce. The pines tend to come out in clumps of 2 needles or 3 needles in each group, whereas the pinyon is the exception to that rule, the single-leaf pinyon. It comes out in single needles, one at a time from the branch. Tends to grow at mid-elevations, and it produces that large soft-shelled pine nut that you see on the stands down around Cedar City and sometimes in Price Canyon. You see pine nut stands, and also down in St. George, usually around in the fall, around elk hunting season. I've had several people tell me they associate it with elk hunting season as far as timing, and that's the single-leaf pinyon. The Colorado pinyon, on the other hand, it has 2 needles per bundle, and it produces the smaller hard-shelled pine nut that you see sold in New Mexico and Arizona. And according to some, folks who are from New Mexico and Arizona tend to prefer that hard-shell nut because that's what they grew up eating. But folks from Utah often prefer that larger soft-shell nut. People tend to eat them a little bit like sunflower seeds, and take one in their mouth and chew off the seed and spit it out, and it's kind of a good occupation when you're driving long distances. There's a crown of that tree in southern Utah. In this slide I threw in to compare the foliage between the pinyon and the juniper, with the pinyon on the right and the juniper foliage on the left. Moving into juniper. Here in Utah we tend to call our juniper cedar. It's not technically a cedar, but that works. There's 2 different kinds. There's a Utah juniper and the Rocky Mountain juniper. This background slide from outside of the Cedar City area. Identifying the junipers, telling them apart. The Utah juniper is most easily told apart by its larger cones. And in general, Rocky Mountain juniper tends to have a more upright growth form. This is a special juniper. This is a Rocky Mountain juniper. It's known as the Jardine juniper up the Logan Canyon, up the Wood Camp area. There's a trail up to it. It's a famous sort of tourist site, although you have to walk about 4 or 5 miles to get in there, or ride a mountain bike. And this is famous for being the largest Rocky Mountain juniper in the world, and I believe also the oldest known, and originally was cored and thought to be many thousands of years old, but more recently those estimates have been backed off to around 1,500 years old. And as you can see, there's just a tuft of green growth at the very top of it, and the rest of it is just hardened old wood, but it's a beautiful tree. And I can't remember the numbers, but it's perhaps 8 or 10 feet in diameter. It's tremendous Rocky Mountain juniper specimen. Going into the pine types, more higher elevations in Utah, we have 4 different pines in our pine types, including lodgepole, ponderosa, limber, and bristlecone pines. The lodgepole, it's a pioneer species, meaning it regenerates vigorously after disturbance, like a fire or a clear cut. It's the pioneer label is just saying that it's the first to come in and occupy a site after a disturbance such as these. Most often see them over in the Uintas, and there's a little bit here in Cache County. Often called jack pine is the local name for it, and it's right now greatly affected by the mountain pine beetle outbreak in the Uintas and much of Colorado. I actually worked on a Colorado mountain pine beetle project in the early 1980s, and we thought that was pretty bad, and we'd had lost most of them then, and go there now and it's much worse. Huge drainages of red trees, and the same thing in the Uintas. Pretty significant beetle outbreak there. Lodgepole pine it has needles in bundles of 2. It's 1 to 3 inches long. It's needle length. That's one of the main indicators that it's lodgepole and not a ponderosa. Is that needle length, shorter needles like that. It has serotinous cones that are they remain tightly closed on the tree, glued together, that require a fair bit of heat to open the cones. And the serotiny in a cone can be different depending on where the tree grows. And even 2 trees growing very close to each other can have a different amount of serotiny in the cone, meaning they require a different amount of heat to open the cones. Some really require a hot fire, like up in Yellowstone. There tends to be more serotinous cones, requires hot fire to open the cones there. But down in this neighborhood, northern Utah, our cones tend to be less serotinous and will open just in direct sunlight. It often grows in dense single species stands, and it's often mixed with sage, as you see in the background photo here. Sagebrush, excuse me. Ponderosa pine grows in the southern 2/3 of the state. There's a few errant stands in the northern part, but it's mostly native just in the southern 2/3. Perhaps the nicer stands tend to be out in the edges of the south edges of the La Salles. There's some pretty nice stands in the mountains around Beaver as well, and the Abajos. This might be some of my favorite ponderosa pine stands in Utah. Locally, it's called yellow pine, the bigger, older trees. Actually, that's a west-wide name. Often see yellow pine. There's a yellow pine campground, for example, up in just out of Camas, I think, in the Uintas. And the younger trees are often called black pine because, again, the color of the bark there is more black, and it's younger years. Identifying ponderosa, its needles are in bundles of 2 and 3, but are really long, 3 to 10 inches long. There's the only pine needles in all of Utah that you'll see with needles that long. The older bark tends to turn yellow and orange. Again, the younger bark can be black. Some like to say the inner bark can smell like vanilla, and sticking your nose into the crevices between the bark of a ponderosa pine tree gives a pretty good smell, and it is a little bit like vanilla. Again, they're also common down in Bryce Canyon and in the Pine Valley Mountains, where this background slide comes from, and this one does too. This being the foliage on the ponderosa pine, those long needles you can see from far away with the pine valleys in the background. And just as an aside, this is a mountain mahogany tree. Beautiful small tree we won't really cover today, but common here on southern slopes in Utah. Limber pine grows at the highest elevations in Utah, although I do see it right along Logan Canyon, right near the bottom of the canyon, so it will come down pretty low. But most often we see it up near tree line. It has a special relationship with the Clark's nutcracker. That's a bird that you see up at high elevations, and Professor Emeriti here, Ron Lanner, has documented that relationship, that the birds will take they'll open the cones and they'll stash the cones and the seeds in these caches in the mountains and the rocks, and they'll come back and get them, but they forget a few and they miss a few, and there's some caches they don't get to, and according to Dr. Lanner, he thinks that a lot of our limber pine regeneration, it requires that Clark's nutcracker to hide the seeds down in the crevices in the rocks on the hillside like that in the background, and forget about a few of them, and that's how the limber pine has come to depend on the Clark's nutcracker for regeneration. And of course the Clark's nutcracker is depending on those seeds for survival, so it's a symbiotic relationship between them. Again, it's also been recently affected by mountain pine beetle. There's several scientists who believe that historically limber pine was too high elevation and too cold to be strongly affected by mountain pine beetle, but with warming times, it appears that the pine beetles are moving up into limber pines. That's evidenced at the top of Logan Canyon near Beaver Mountain ski area. There's several dying right now. And there's some scientists who believe that this effect on the limber pine has been really negative for the grizzly bears in Yellowstone, who depend on those pine nuts for their incredible nutritional value and fat content. And when they're not getting them, they're moving out of Yellowstone and up into other mountain ranges in Utah, or in Wyoming, such as the Wind River Mountains, and so more grizzlies are being seen in Wind Rivers than have been before. Identifying limber pine, it's the only one in Utah with needles in groups of 5. Well, it's not the only one, but the most common one. A little bit longer needles than some others, almost 3 inches long. Smooth gray bark, and it has flexible limber branches, hence the name. Bristlecone pine is known for being one of the oldest trees in the world, tree types in the world. Some of them are over 4,000 years old. Bristlecone is common in the Cedar Breaks area and Powell Point, and at higher elevations along the Utah-Nevada border. It occupies a small range of high elevation sites in Utah. This is from this background photo from Cedar Breaks. Identifying bristlecone is again needles, another one in needles of groups of 5, but this one much shorter needles. It's got more of the bottle brush look, and often the needles will be specked with resin, as you can see in this background photo. Moving on to the next forest type, and our most prevalent upland forest type, Quaking aspen, perhaps a keystone species economically and ecologically here in Utah. It's another pioneer species, similar to the lodgepole pine. It responds vigorously by sprouting from its roots after disturbance, such as a fire or a clear cut. There's 1.4 million acres of Quaking aspen in Utah, and it has experienced a decline over the last few years, a decline that's been written about in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and all sorts of other pieces of literature about it. We've hosted here with USU Forestry Extension, we've hosted several aspen conferences over the last several years, and I think we're destined to host more of them in the future as we learn more and more about this very important species in Utah. It's important for its biodiversity and grazing, aesthetics, and wildlife habitat. It's known from its unique leaf shape and that white bark that we see, and its distinctive yellow fall foliage, occasionally turning orange in some spots. There's that classic aspen leaf. And this is Jason Johnson, a forester with the Division of Forestry, and he's standing in the middle of a clear cut that was done perhaps 8 years ago. I think this is on the property of one of our guests today, Carol Dixon, and this area was harvested 8 years ago, and already it's hard to see Jason standing out in the middle of it because the reproduction of the aspen is so vigorous. It's just taken over, doing really great. It's just the kind of result that you hope for when you're cutting an aspen stands. And this helps to regenerate and grow more young stands, and part of the issue with the decline, a lot of scientists and managers believe, is just that our aspen tend to be pretty old. Aspen only lives to be about 100 or 150 years old, and most of the aspen we have now is a result of disturbance during pioneer days, which is about 150 years ago. So it's just dying of old age is what some scientists believe, and so by shaking it up a little bit and creating more younger stands, I think we're doing a good thing for aspen, the future of aspen in Utah. This is an example of that decline. Some of the first decline really we looked at long before it hit the front or the pages of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. Up in Cedar Mountain, Dr. Jim Bounds and Extension Agent Chad Reed have been documenting the decline there for over 10 years now. And many stands look like the stand on the left in this photograph, where you can see light right through the stand. There's no trees coming up underneath, and a lot of the older ones are dying off, and a lot of people are concerned about it. But on the other side of the fence, the right side of the fence, you can see smaller trees coming in, and that makes all the difference to know that there's regeneration happening and younger trees coming in. Some think that grazing has a lot to do with that, and this fence might indicate that, but it's a pretty complex subject, and it's not, a lot of local folks feel pretty strongly that it's not just about grazing. There's a lot more going on there. Douglas fir is our second most common upland forest type with over 1 million acres. It's often called red fir, and locally and historically. I can't remember the number off the top of my head. I think there's like a dozen canyons and ridgetops in Utah called Red Fir Canyon and Red Fir Ridge, and so and it's called that way. It's called red fir because its wood is red, and it's often called that around the West. It often grows in pure stands on pretty steep slopes, and it's intermediately shade tolerant. Kind of introducing a new term there, perhaps. The pioneer species I mentioned earlier, they come out right in the sun, so they have no tolerance for the shade. They're very shade intolerant, whereas Douglas fir is intermediately shade tolerant. It can stand some shade to regenerate, and some of the trees that we'll look at here coming up are highly shade tolerant, like the firs that are coming. Douglas fir is not a true fir. It's one way you can tell is its cones are very different from a true fir, and we'll look at that in a second. Its needles are borne singly, not in bundles like most of the pines, and they're flat and tend to be pretty blunt, not very sharp to grab a branch of Douglas fir, and the foliage is pretty soft. The cones have a characteristic mousetail bract we'll take a look at here in a second, and if you grab the end of a Douglas fir, although the needles are quite soft, if you grab the end between your fingers, the end of a small branchlet, and you push your thumb into the bud, the end, it's often pretty sharp, and that's a pretty easy way to distinguish Douglas fir even when it's quite young. These are the mousetail bracts that I was referring to. Looks like little mouse tails sticking out of the cone, and you can see that the needles are not very sharp either. So that's the certain telltale for identifying Douglas fir. This is a managed Douglas fir stand. I think this one actually is across the border in Soda Springs, Idaho. Beautifully managed stand and U.S. Forest Service property on the Caribou National Forest. Our first true fir is white fir. It has there's not a huge amount of white fir, a huge amount of land covered by just white fir in Utah relative to the rest, but it's certainly significant. It grows south of Manaway, typically, south of Brigham City area. We don't have it up in the Cache National Forest. It's often mixed with Douglas fir, and you often see white fir in Utah having several tops, several growing points, like we can see in the background of this slide. due to previous bark beetle attacks. It's a scolitis beetle that gets in the top of the tree, and this is an active scolitis infestation from a few years ago in Hobble Creek. And often they'll sort of recover from it. They'll still have multiple tops, but it won't kill the tree. So if you walk into a white fir stand, you see that they have multiple tops, I tend to suspect that that was part of its history of the stand. Identifying white fir, the needles are borne singly, as all firs are, and they're 2 to 3 inches long, longer than our other true fir, which is coming up, Subalpine Fir, and they tend to be more silver green in color, or blue to silver green. On to Engelmann spruce, Utah's most common spruce, despite the fact that our state tree is a Colorado blue spruce. Only about 5% of our spruce in Utah is blue spruce. Most of it is Engelmann. There's been a movement afoot to change the Utah state tree, and different people have tried different things, juniper and others, but as it stands, it's Colorado blue spruce. But Engelmann tends to grow at high elevations, like at White Pine Lake in the background of this slide, up in the Cache National Forest. And it's experienced a significant, even catastrophic beetle invasion in most of southern and central Utah, most evidenced in the areas around the Manti, near in Sanpete County, and down in the Dixie near Bryce Mountain, or near down in the Dixie in southern Utah. Identifying Engelmann spruce, we like to call them sticky spruce because you grab a branch, a handful of foliage of that, and it hurts. It's very, very sticky. Although I understand blue spruce to be even more sticky, but it still hurts considerably to grab a handful of spruce foliage. So that helps us identify it. We call it friendly fir because they're soft and easy to grab, and sticky spruce. Historically it was called white pine. There's lots of white pine drainages and peaks and knobs spread out around Utah, and I think that it was because the wood is white. That's why the early pioneers called it that. And it does have significant economic value, especially as house logs. This is the tallest known Engelmann spruce, the largest Engelmann spruce in the state, a national champion. I had the honor of nominating along with some friends, and it's up here near Tony Grove Lake on the Cache National Forest. It's 152 feet tall, and it's about 6 or 7 feet across at the bottom. Engelmann spruce in Utah has seen this tremendous beetle outbreak, as I mentioned, and this is evidence of it. This on the Skyline Drive and near the Gooseberry Cabins. The background, all that gray forest, is dead Engelmann spruce. In the foreground, we're having this fall we had a timber harvest tour, our 7th annual timber harvest tour. Folks come out and look at an active timber harvest that we're standing in. It was a spruce salvage sale, trying to take off some of that dead spruce after it's all died, and it still has significant value as house logs. Subalpine fir, our last true fir. It's very shade tolerant, likes to grow in the shade of other trees, so it's kind of partly what's going on with the aspen in the state is that the aspen came in originally, created shade, as a pioneer species, but now there's shade underneath it, and that's a perfect situation for subalpine fir to grow at high elevations underneath the aspen, and it takes over aspen stands, and a lot of scientists are concerned about that process right now. It tends to grow at our highest elevations, up near tree line. It's often called balsam by locals. It has very low economic value, not very good for making logs out of or for making firewood out of. There's some value in making mill props and such from it. And it often grows with spruce in the spruce fir forest type. Identifying subalpine fir. The crowns, as you could see from the last photo, were very conical, very sharp crowns, and it's got that friendly fir thing going for it, the soft foliage. You can see from those needles that they're upright and that the ends are really rounded, which makes them real soft. And the cones, they tend to fall apart at maturity, so you rarely see a subalpine fir cone. And they grow at the tops of the trees as well. I wanted to make a mention of snags. People don't often think about it, but a snag is a standing dead tree, and snags have tremendous wildlife value in Utah and other western states. In Idaho, estimated that 150 vertebrate species will live in snags, from salamanders to frogs to all kinds of different critters. Really important for birds and wildlife. So I always encourage landowners to try to leave snags if they're doing any management on their property. Really add a lot to the character and the biodiversity of a piece of property. Wanted to bring up some other resources available to you that are available through our website, which will be featured on our next slide. One of them is a USU Tree Browser CD that offers all the trees that we talked about, lots of full color photographs and descriptions of those, along with several hundred other trees that are not native to Utah but do grow here and grow well. Somebody is considering planting a tree in their yard. It's a great way to get a feel for what attributes different trees have and what they look like and what they might look like in fall foliage and such. Another resource is a guide to the trees of Utah and the Intermountain West, written by Michael Kuntz. We have available. You can call us or write to us, and it's a full book with lots of trees in the area. And finally, I should mention the Tree Browser and the Guide to Trees book do cost money, I think $10 each. The Guide to Trees, I should also mention, is available on Amazon.com. But finally, the Utah Forest Types, an Introduction to Utah Forests fact sheet is available in a PDF form on our website, or we could mail it to you if you'd like. In our reading room on our website, you can find that. Before I move on to my final slide, I would like to do one more poll. I wanted to ask what you thought about this webcasting format, and I'm going to open this poll right now and give people a few minutes to respond, or a minute to respond to that. So far we're seeing positive results. People do seem to like it. Seems like it's working for folks. We've got about half of you have responded already. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your responses.
Do you want to show the results?
I'll go ahead and broadcast the results of that, and some do prefer in-person presentations. I want to let you know that I still intend to do in-person presentations around the state at different times and different topics, especially our timber harvest tour. We've been having 40 or 50 people attend that every year and get together on a piece of property. It tends to be exemplary of good timber harvesting, or the best one I can find in the state each year. That's accessible anyway, and we get together and go out and have a look at that. You'll be getting postcards in the mail about that here this summer. And looks like people do like the way this webcast has worked out. I'll give you a few more seconds. We had 36 out of 54 respond. And then I'm going to be closing this poll and shrinking it. And I'll ask you for your patience to stand with me for one more question. I'd like to know how this time works for you. Curious if this was really good timing for those folks who could attend, or if I should consider strongly moving to a different time of day. See people responding. Give folks a minute to weigh in on that.
You can let this one broadcast.
Oh, yeah. I will broadcast the results there so everybody can see what's going on. And I think I've already talked to some folks about doing a future one on urban forestry, or perhaps an introduction to Utah's urban forests. Might be another next one. I think we'll maybe shoot for doing them quarterly or so for starters. So I'm expecting maybe the next one to do in March on a similar schedule. Looks like afternoon is working well for people. 39 out of 54 having voted. I'll give you one more second. Last call before I close that poll. And I'd like to also remind you that we will be sending you via email an evaluation form. If you could take a few minutes to fill that out, we'd really appreciate it, and open to any suggestions for how we approach this and what topics we do in the future, please. Okay, closing that poll. And finally, for more information on any of this, please visit our website there, extension.usu.edu/forestry. We get, I think on average, about 4,000 visitors a month to that website. So we try to keep it kind of updated and with pertinent and interesting information. Please feel free to contact me, Darren McAvoy, darren.mcavoy@usu.edu, or via the more traditional methods. Love to hear from you, and I'm always available to answer your questions via email or phone. And I want to thank you again very much, everybody, for attending today. We had wonderful turnout, better than I would have ever expected, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you, and goodbye.